You kind of feel like you want to do a little sensei, like. Mark, thank you, brother. So Pat framed it up for us, didn't he? I mean, in more ways than one, but wisdom is aligning our lives with reality, and there are unseen realities. And Mark's talking about these unseen realities that we've been walking through, wading into without realizing we've been doing it, getting ourselves in situations where our feet are stuck and we're connected to something we don't want to be connected to. And there's freedom. There's a way out for us. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the wounds. When I was 5th or 6th grade, I was getting ready to go in junior high school. I was a pretty insecure kid. I had good friends, but I was pretty insecure. And I was after school one day playing, and there were these junior high kids way across the playground. And I remember there's a girl and two guys, and they were probably only like a year or two ahead of us in school. But at that age, like a year or two ahead is like they're really big kids, right? And we're little kids. And they kind of moseyed their way over to us. And as they were walking closer to us, I started to feel this nervousness. I started feeling afraid. And they came over to us, and the girl, she starts off the conversation by saying, she points at me and she said, "I saw you laughing at me." I was like, I wasn't laughing at you. I mean, I wasn't laughing. And she says, I saw you laughing at me. And she's pointing at something she's wearing. It's like, "You were laughing at this, weren't you?" And I was like, "I wasn't laughing. I wasn't laughing." And then she kind of just mellowed for a minute. These two guys are just standing there with her. And she turns to my two friends, and she's like, "What are you guys' names?" And my friend says, "Ryan." She said, "What's your name?" "Brian." She turns to me, she's like, "What's your name?" I say, "Josh." She goes, "Josh is a dog's name." I was, I'm not going to talk back to her. I'm just like, okay, and she goes on. I don't know how long this lasted. It felt like an eternity for a 5th grader. Just felt, and I was scared to death. I didn't know what was going to happen. I remember at one point she starts talking to my buddies, two of my best friends, and she says to them, like, "Are you guys friends with this guy?" And one of my best friends says, kind of meekly, "Uh-huh." The other one says, "Well, not really." And I'm just feeling like I don't know what she saw in me. I don't know what she was sniffing in the air around me, but she's letting me have it. And I just felt so afraid. And then after however long it was, this is what she does. She says, "We're just kidding with you, man. It's just a joke." And then they kind of walk away. And I'm like, okay. And my one friend, the Benedict Arnold friend, kind of walks off one direction. My other friend Ryan and I, we start walking home because we live closer to each other. And we get up the hill and around the corner, so we're out of sight of the playground. And I without any will of my own, I just start crying. Just tears. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Ryan. And I was so embarrassed. And he was like, it's okay. He was kind of like, "It's okay, you're crying." That was a small wound compared to some of the other wounds that I've encountered and some of the other wounds I know that you've walked with. The enemy does not fight fair. He just doesn't. He doesn't give a rat's butt about how old you are or how wounded you are or if you're weak or sick or if it wasn't your fault. He'll come after you. That's just the way he likes to play. When I was 3, my mom and my dad divorced. My mom moved my brothers and I to Colorado, so we were 2,000 miles away from my dad. The enemy didn't care that it wasn't my fault. The enemy didn't care that my dad loved me and was doing the best he could, or that my mom was trying her best. He didn't care. He was happy whenever he could to sidle up next to me and in his subtle ways whisper ideas and images into my head about who I was and what it meant that my dad was so far away. So when the Boy Scout or the Cub Scout troop would meet and they'd have a father-son night, and the Cub Master, whoever he is, he's my kind of surrogate father for the night, and I'm watching other guys with their dads, the enemy doesn't mind like sidling up next to me and saying things like, "If you were worth more, your dad would be here too." And I'm not saying that I ever heard the words consciously, but for a little kid, like when you're little kids, and this is just psychologically true, the world revolves around you. Those of you who have kids, you know this is true. And so when something bad happens in your life, it is a very common experience for little kids to believe it must be about me. The kid doesn't have the opportunity to kind of go, "Well, my parents were young when they married," and da-da-da-da-da. And when you have, even when you're looking back at some of the wounds in your childhood, and you excuse it away with things that are like, "Well, they did the best they could," or, "Well, my mom and my dad came from broken homes," that's adult speak. That's not a kid's interpretation, a kid's experience of it. And what I want to encourage you is in this. The wounds that Mark's talking about, they don't just go away. There are things that you needed as a kid. And by definition, if you needed something and you did not get it, where does the need go? It doesn't go away. If it went away, it was a want or a preference. But if it was a need, it's still there. Every kid needs security. Every kid needs to have a sense of significance. Every kid needs to have a sense of purpose and agency. Agency means like I can make decisions. Every kid needs to have a sense of their bodies, that this is mine. Pat talked about domain. And Mark, even who didn't use the word, like he's talking about domain. We're given access, right? He needs to have a sense of like, this is my body. You can't do something to this if it's not okay with me. Whether it's a sloppy kiss from Aunt Edna, or someone touching you when you didn't want to be touched, or spitting on you when you didn't want to spit, or pushed you, or punching you, whatever it was. Every kid needs a mom and a dad. It's the way God's wired us. That doesn't mean when you have a mom and a dad, everything's swell, but that's just the way it is. We live in a fallen world. And I can speak confidently about wounds because of this. You live in a fallen world that just doesn't supply for all your needs. And so every one of us is walking around with some wounds. Now what do we do with this? I think the first thing is we just acknowledge it. And as men, I think it's easy for us to try to brush stuff off. It's easy for me when I'm walking with my friend to kind of just, dry the tears and try to pretend like it didn't happen the next day. It happened. Now here's the other thing. We went through that declaration with Mark, all those truths in Scripture about who we are and what's rightfully ours. The other reality is this. You and I, each one of us, are uniquely made, fearfully and wonderfully made. Your fingerprints are unlike anybody else who exists on the planet today, any of the other 8 billion people, unlike any of the other people who have ever lived in history. Your DNA, how you look, how you feel, the makeup of your personality and your physical nature, your spirituality, and there's no combination except you, like you. And the enemy wants to come after what makes you, you. The enemy wants to come after you sometimes in the area where you're gifted. Some of you, God might have gifted you to be a speaker. And something happened when you were little or somewhere along the way where you started believing, I'm not very good at that. Some of you are actually athletes and you think you're not. Some of you are loving and you think you're not. Some of you are extroverts and you think you're not. Some of you are comfortable being by yourself and you think you're not. Because the enemy has come after something about who you are. So years later, I'm involved in this ministry called Regeneration, and I'm just inviting Jesus, like, Lord, what are the wounds? Where am I still walking around like this? And this old memory of 5th or 6th grade comes to mind. It was a long time ago. Is it still doing something in me, Lord? And I'm like, okay, Lord, I don't know if it's still doing something to me, but let's pray. Let's see. So a guy who was mentoring me, we just sat down and we just invited, Lord, like, what do you want to do with this thing? Josh has this old memory. And in the memory, it wasn't just me, when Jesus brought it back up, it wasn't just me and my 2 buddies, my one good friend and my benedictine friend, and these other 3 kids. Jesus was there. And as we're praying, this is what my mentor begins to pray. He's like, Josh, do you realize what happened there? I was like, no. What is your name? It's Josh. What's your full name? It's Joshua. What does Joshua mean? Well, Joshua is the English version of the Hebrew word Yeshua, which means God is salvation. That's my name. My name, part of my identity, is that God is salvation. And I'm on the playground, and this girl, probably not realizing at all what she's doing, she's being a tool of the enemy, and who knows what the woundedness in her life is, that she's taking it out on some other little kid, is coming after this one place. Why that one place? You know, the Greek translation of Yeshua, you're probably familiar with this word, Jesus. Jesus' name, Jesus, because he's given the name, God is salvation. And I'm not standing up here and saying I'm the Messiah, so now you know. I'm not saying that. My point is, Like God gave me, and I'm blessed by it, God gave me a name and an identity that has something to do with being connected to him and saved by him. And that's true about me. And the enemy never wanted me to know that. What is it about you that the enemy's been trying to steal from you? This is how this works. I want to draw another diagram here. I'm going to erase Mark's beautiful apple. Well, actually, it was bruised, Mark. So, and Mark talked about this, but I want you to see this, okay? So here's a wound. The wound comes in whatever form. It can be the absence of something that you needed, like a mom or a dad or certain kinds of affection. I don't know how many of you, I've talked to so many guys whose fathers were absent, or fathers who were present but they were absent, or fathers who were present but they were never physically affectionate. This happens for women too. Or a mom who was over, I mean, like, we're not trying to vilify our parents. That's not the issue. That's not the issue. Like, and when God says honor your mother and your father, it's not about, like, that doesn't mean being dishonest about the reality of their pros and their cons. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Every family has strengths and weaknesses. And everybody's experienced something in the past. So again, I'm not trying to vilify your mom or your dad, or my mom or my dad. But the wound comes, and then with the wound comes what Mark called a lie. It's a message. John Eldredge calls it the message of the arrows. So this is the message. And I remember what I said before, it's like it comes subtly. So it's often not just like you're an idiot, and you hear like, hey, I just heard somebody say I'm an idiot. Usually it's something that's kind of like a subtle message. It can even be an image of you. So if you ever have an image of yourself that kind of floats around somewhere in the ether of your brain, and it's unbecoming of you, you kind of like look in the mirror and kind of see it sometimes. Like that can be the message. It's an idea. Dallas Willard actually says that the enemy loves to work in the realm of ideas and images. And I'd say like that's part of the language of the heart is image. So what are the images you have of yourself? Some of you, have you ever had people say some things that are true about you? They say, hey, I see this in you. And you go, I don't see that at all. They're saying something positive about you and you're like, thanks. But you walk away and go, I'm not going to take that. That's not real. Could it be that you have a different image of you than what God has of you? So this is how the enemy, in my experience, this is how the enemy does it. The messages that he communicates align with your experience of reality. Align with your experience of reality. Now you live in a fallen reality, but he's trying to line up with your experience. So it just kind of makes sense. And you go, yeah, I guess that's the way the world is. I'll just a classic example. Like I'm going through a hardship and I cry out to the Lord, like, Lord, where are you? Lord, where are you? And the idea pops in your head, and the idea might even be in the first person. It might be like, I'm not even entirely sure God is there. Now you might have thought it was you thinking the thought, but sometimes the enemy just plants a little idea. And then it goes on, and there's still no answer. And maybe God cares about everybody else. Everybody else seems to, like sometimes some of you guys in the area of sexuality, you've been in situations where you've been like, I know God set me free, and then you end up doing the same thing again, and you're going like, maybe I'm not really a Christian. Is it possible that line is part of what Mark was talking about? The enemy's trying to get you to like believe that's what that's you, when it's actually the enemy's not the Christian, you're the Christian. Maybe even the line, maybe I'm not a Christian, isn't really coming from you. Maybe it's what Paul talks about is the sin in you, or maybe it's even the enemy coming after you, or maybe it's the world. But it's an interpretation of your experience of reality. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Following the message comes the agreement. This is where you give your assent to the lie that you've heard. And it can be a subtle assent. So this is, in essence, it's almost like you can picture it this way. The enemy comes up to you and he says, hey, I know that you're feeling like crap right now, and I want you to know it's because you're crappy. And he pushes the paper across the table and just says, if that makes sense to you, just sign that. And you go, it does kind of seem like my experience. I do kind of experience it from other people. And you sign it. It's just you're agreeing. Like, I think this is true about me. This is what Mark talked about, the power of our words. Now what happens? You've agreed with this. And so what does this do now? This sets you up for more wounds. And my black pen is going dead, but I'm pointing back. So here's the cycle. You've made an agreement with something that's not true, and that agreement that's not true, that message of the arrows now keeps pinging you. Bing, bing, bing. And so now you're being wounded over again. in the same way. And so it just gets deeper and deeper. And so that apple starts to get more and more festered, which opens you up to more and more demonic stuff. I think part of what happened with that girl, and I don't entirely know, but I think part of what happened, I think part of when I said, it's like she sniffed something in the air and she pointed at me. I think part of what she was sensing, or part of whatever was happening in the spiritual realm, was some sense of something that was already happening to me. And so in this cycle, and you ever find yourself kind of in this self-repeating cycle? I think this is some of it. And so when we pray through these things, break these agreements, we're trying to get out of the cycle. But we have to get back to this place, to this wound. And so maybe a simple takeaway for you guys as you're trying to leave behind sexual sin of some kind, I'm going to connect the dots between that and this in a minute, is to begin even saying, Lord, where am I walking around with a wound? Where am I walking around with a wound? Where have I been wounded? Some of you, even the descriptions I've given you, like going, I kind of resonate with that feeling. I'm not sure where it comes from. Some of you will need help for this. You'll need the Holy Spirit's help for sure. You might need the help of somebody else. Because what we grow up with so often is normal to us, and so normal to us, in fact, so much a part of our environment that we don't even see it. We don't even know. It's like white noise in the background. So it's white noise, and we don't notice the dishwasher's going until somebody walks into our house and says, "What's that noise?" And we go, "I don't. What's that? What noise?" And they say, "This noise. Do you hear it?" And we go, "I don't hear it." And they start to recognize that. I remember sharing, again, the same mentor. I was sharing a poem that my father had written at one point, and I was just like, "Yeah, here's the poem," and it was about his experience in my family, but with my stepmom and my half sisters, who I love dearly. But his poem was about his family, but it wasn't about me. And I shared the book with my mentor, and he read the poem, and he was like, "What do you think of that poem?" I was like, "It's a nice poem." My mentor was like, "I don't like it." I was like, "Why not?" It pisses me off. Why does it piss you off? Because he's talking about his family, and you're not there. Oh, yeah. Now, he wasn't trying to create a wound. He was just trying to expose a wound. Why? So I could be healed. Boethius said, if you want to be healed, you must expose your wound. Listen how Jesus started his ministry. Jesus stands up in a synagogue. He goes back to his hometown. He stands up in a synagogue, and he quotes the first part of this chapter in Isaiah, which is a messianic prophecy. He's basically saying, I am the Messiah. And this is the passage he chooses. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to prisoners, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a spirit of fainting. So they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Then they will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will raise up the former devastations, and they will repair the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. Now, Jesus just reads the first part of that passage, but every one of his listeners would be familiar with the whole thing, and even goes on beyond there. The Lord wants to expose your wounds. He wants to let us know where we're wounded because he desires to heal. He is a healer. He's a healer, and he wants to heal you. Now, all of this stuff speaks on some deep level to our identity, to who we specifically are. I use the illustration of talking about Joshua. Because each one of us, every man in the room, is asking a question. John Eldredge says this is the question that all men are asking. Do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes? Now, your version of that question might be different. It might just mean, do I have worth? Does it matter that I'm here? Am I significant enough? Is there value? Like when I walk in a room, does it matter to anybody? And the enemy wants the answer to that to be unequivocally, we don't believe it is. But the answer to that unequivocally is yes. When you arrive in the kingdom, however tattered or bruised you are, your Father is going to rise up out of his chair. He's going to say your name. And he's going to walk through the crowd, whoever else is there, to embrace you. How's that going to feel? This is what we're longing for, the intimacy we're longing for. Well, how do we experience it? We need to be healed. We need our wounds healed. If we don't get these wounds healed, you know where we take the question? a lot of us in the room, to sex. And James talked about this. Because if a woman or a man, somebody else will give me their body, that's one of the greatest expressions of worth that God has created. And in that twisted way, we feel like if they gave me themselves, if they expose themselves to me, that makes me somebody. Even if it's just on the pages of pornography. Okay, you know the sad thing about that? The women in the pages of pornography, or the women who would give themselves to us, or the men who would give themselves to us without the covenant commitment of marriage, or without the God's ordination of male-female marriage, if we don't have that, and somebody's giving themselves to me, what does it mean about them? Why are they doing that? Why would someone give me that access to themselves unless they too are walking around with a wound? And so, maybe a rougher way of saying it, an old friend of mine used to say, it's like 2 ticks, no dog. But in a pastoral sense, it's 2 people who are using each other or feeding off each other. When I go to porn, I'm using a broken woman, feeding off of her flesh to try to heal my wound. That's not the men that God made us to be. So why acknowledge your wound? Why get in touch with the pain that you carry? Why go back there? Why should I feel that crap again? Maybe so you stop wounding somebody else and digging into their wound to try to feed yourself. There's no shame here. I'm not trying to say this to shame you. This is my story. But what I want to stoke in you is not shame. I want to stoke in you your God-given desire to be Christ-like in your life and in your loves. And what did Christ do for his bride? He suffered for her. He was wounded for her. Would you be willing to face your wounds for the sake of men and women everywhere?